Good morning. In what we call the Lord's Prayer, there's a line that says, "Your will be done." And that is such an important prayer. It's a prayer that underlies every other prayer because although God has allowed us to ask Him for things, we can sometimes get it wrong. And so it's important that we ask for God's will to be done in the world, in the church, in our nation, and in our lives. Now, in the short passage from the letter of James, which was read to us earlier, there are two key takeaways that I want to leave with you today. These thoughts have been on my mind, and I want to pass them on to you. And here they are. First of all, the idea that all human planning is inevitably tentative. And secondly, the thought that all human life is essentially fragile. First of all human planning is inevitably tentative. Last July, when I began to share with Simon and Steve, our elders at the time, about our thoughts and plans for the future, for Gilly and myself, our personal future, and also, of course, about the church. When I was talking to them, I came into that by reading this passage from James, because I'm aware that we can think things through carefully and we can plan in detail, and as Christians we can soak everything in prayer and yet still get it wrong or get bits of it wrong. And so often God has to adjust our direction or alter something of our planning here, change its shape there. So we can plan, but we can get it wrong, and this passage underlines that. Now, I want to say it's not wrong to plan. Of course it isn't. It's human to plan. I think it's how we're built. We have the capacity to plan. We want to plan. We need to plan. And of course, we all have to have things to look forward to. It's interesting that in the passage here in James, it talks in particular about plans for business and making money. And we can see on the news at the moment how so much of that has been affected by the current crisis. All human planning is inevitably tentative. It's not wrong to plan. It really isn't. But what is wrong is to plan without reference to God. To act like we're in control when we're not. And if this time is teaching us anything at all, it surely is that we're not in control. Powerful people, politicians, rich and wealthy people, they're not in control. They're not immune from this virus. Great big institutions, businesses, industries are being affected by this invisible virus. We are not in control. On better days, we may feel like we're in control. The truth is we're never in control, and this crisis is forcing us to face that. It's not wrong to plan, and when we're through this, we'll want to plan again. One of the difficulties at the moment is that we can't really make plans, can we? We live from day to day, even moment to moment, and we've had plans disrupted by this. You've had plans disrupted by this. And that's the situation we find ourselves in. Let me just underline it again. It's not planning that's wrong. It's planning without reference to God. And James says, instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. If it is the Lord's will. In these days, I'd like to encourage Christians to take as much time as they can. If they have extra time, to take it, to pray, to think, to reflect, to meditate, to journal, if you do that, to read scripture, and to ask God, in what ways might you want my life to be different the other side of this crisis, God willing? Are there priorities that need reordering? Are there things I'm doing I need to stop doing? Are there things I'm not doing that I ought to be doing? Here's my life, Lord, but it's your life. Your will be done. What's your will for me going forward? And there's an opportunity in this time of testing, don't you think, to learn so much wisdom from God if we will allow him to teach us. Well, there you are. All human planning is inevitably tentative. But the second thing that we see here is that all human life is essentially fragile. James says, what is your life? You are like a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. A little while. It's a graphic picture, isn't it? You step outside on an autumn morning or on a winter's morning, exhale, and for a moment you see your breath and then it's gone. And life is like that. It's fleeting. It's short. Even if you live to be as old as the Queen herself or older, life is short. And as you get older, you look back on your life and you think, where did it go? I remember my 30th birthday like it was yesterday. I'm now 63 and I often think, where did those years go? And for those of you in your 70s, 80s, 90s, I'm sure you'll say, well, for me, life has just raced by. Where did the time go? Life is transient, it's short, it's fragile. I remember exactly where I was when I first heard Sting singing his song, How Fragile We Are. It was early one morning and I was driving through Hare Hills in Leeds in my beaten up old VW. That's a long time ago. And this song came on the radio, How Fragile We Are. And indeed we are. We know it. We can be incredibly strong, but we know that we're also fragile. Well, there's one thing that you and I know, and we know it well, and we may not like to know it, but we do know it. It is that we are mortal. We're going to die. But for the most part, it's a thought that maybe we keep theoretical and we push it away. Yes, I'll die one day, somewhere, but hopefully not today, not tomorrow, not in the near future. It's going to happen, and I know it could happen. Something could cause it to happen, but basically I want to keep it at arm's length. And don't you find in these days you can't do that? We are hearing tragic news day after day, and the truth is we're going to die and we need to be ready to meet God. And the Bible teaches that there's a life beyond this life, and whether we spend it with God in his company, enjoying his friendship, his heaven, or away from him is dependent on how we treat him now. Do we want him? Do we receive him? Or do we push him away? With the prospect of death, and that prospect always faces us, not just during the days of this crisis, but with the prospect of our own mortality, we need to know we're right with God. There's a well-known preacher, and a few years ago he got a chance to speak to an Arab terrorist leader. You may remember the name Yasser Arafat. And this preacher asked him a question that was framed something like this: where will you be 25 years after you die? It's a good question. There was a man who died on the cross next to Jesus, and he points the way to how any of us can get right with God. He recognized that he needed God's mercy, and he simply said to Jesus, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus said to him, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. He saw the sincerity of the man's heart. He knew his prayer was real, and he responded. And what we see from that Easter story is that it's not complicated to become a Christian. You don't have to go through some convoluted process to get in, fill in a lot of forms. There just has to be a genuine cry from your heart. God, be merciful to me. God, forgive me. Make me right with you. Thank you that Jesus died for the things I've done wrong. And as I finish this talk today, I'd just like to say, if you want to know more about becoming a Christian, then a good place to start would be having a look at the Christianity Explored website. We'll give you the details at the end of this talk. Also, if you'd like to write to us at the King's Church address, which you'll be given, we will be very glad to help you. Can I thank you for joining us this morning and being part of this service? And just to say to the whole church family, we miss you, we love you, we're longing for the day when we can all get back together in the same building again. Until then, you're in our hearts every day. We are praying for you, we are thinking about you, and if you need us, just call, email, ring, whatever you want to do, just get in touch with us and we'll try to help you. God bless you through the coming week.